I sold the house on a Thursday, closed the deal, signed the papers, shook the realtor's hand, and by Friday morning I was at Pearson with one check bag and a carry-on. I didn't tell my son. I didn't tell my daughter-in-law. I left a letter in the kitchen, on the counter, next to the coffee maker, where I knew they'd find it. And I walked out the front door for the last time. That was 4 months ago. I'm sitting on a terrace in Lisbon right now, drinking a coffee that costs €1.50, watching pigeons fight over someone's dropped pastry on the cobblestones below, and I feel more like myself than I have in years. Let me go back to the beginning. Because the beginning is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. My wife passed away 6 years ago. Lung cancer. She never smoked a day in her life, which is the cruelest kind of joke the universe can play on a person. Her name was Irene, and she was the kind of woman who remembered everybody's birthday, kept a garden that the neighbors would slow down to look at from their cars, and made a butter tart that I have genuinely never tasted anywhere else. When she died, the house in Oakville felt enormous. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with her rose bushes that I had no idea how to take care of. I tried. They died anyway. I felt terrible about it. My son, he's 38 now, moved back into the house about 8 months after Irene passed. Not into the house exactly. He and his wife bought a place on the other side of Oakville, about 12 minutes away. But they started coming over constantly, every Sunday for dinner, sometimes Thursday evenings too, which was fine, more than fine actually. I was lonely. I cooked too much food every time. I liked having them there. What I didn't notice, not right away, was how the conversation kept circling back to the house. Dad, have you thought about downsizing? Dad, this place must be expensive to heat in winter. Dad, you're rattling around in here alone. It doesn't make sense. I answered honestly each time. I told them I liked my house. I'd lived there for 29 years. I knew which step on the stairs creaked. I knew the way the afternoon light came through the kitchen window in October and made the whole room look gold. I wasn't rattling around. I was home. My daughter-in-law. I'll call her what she is. She was never warm to me even when things were polite. She had this way of smiling while she said things that weren't kind. Not a real smile. More like a facial expression she'd decided to deploy before she opened her mouth. She used it a lot that year. It's just that we worry, she'd say. You're getting older. What if something happens and you're alone? I was 66 years old. I walked 4 kilometers every morning. I had a full checkup every year, blood pressure fine, cholesterol managed. I wasn't a project. The money conversation happened in February, a Sunday. Sleet outside, the ugly gray kind that makes the whole city look like it's apologizing for existing. My son came in, took off his coat, and I could tell immediately that something was different. He didn't settle in the way he usually did. He sat at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface like he was bracing himself. His wife sat across from him. She'd brought a folder. I made tea and sat down and waited. They'd made some investments, he told me. A business venture with a friend of his. Someone I'd met twice, didn't trust on instinct, kept my mouth shut about because I was trying to be a supportive father. The venture had not gone well. They were looking at somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000 in losses. They were also behind on their mortgage. The friend had pulled out. My son had signed documents he perhaps shouldn't have signed. We need help, Dad. I sat with that for a moment. I asked how much. $90,000 to cover the business loss and get current on the mortgage and have a buffer. I didn't have $90,000 sitting in a savings account. I had retirement savings, investments, the equity in my house, my pension from 31 years of working for the municipality, a life I'd built carefully so I wouldn't be a burden to anyone. I told him I didn't have that kind of liquid cash available. The folder opened. My daughter-in-law had, I realized slowly, prepared for this. She had printed out an estimate of what my house was worth. She'd circled the number. She slid it across the table toward me. If you sell, she said, you'd have more than enough. You could give us what we need and still have plenty left over. You could move somewhere smaller. A condo maybe, or a senior's residence. I'm 66, I said. She kept going. She talked about proximity, about how if I sold and got something smaller, they could help me manage my affairs, how it would be good for everyone, how the house was a lot for one person, how things would be simpler. I looked at my son. He was looking at the table. I told them I would think about it. I wanted them to leave. I needed them to leave. They left. I sat at that kitchen table until the sleet stopped and the streetlights came on. And I thought about Irene, and I thought about 29 years of mortgage payments, and I thought about the folder with the circled number. I didn't say yes. I also didn't say no, not firmly, which I now understand was a mistake. In the absence of a clear refusal, my daughter-in-law interpreted silence as negotiation. The calls started. My son, usually, though I could hear her in the background sometimes. Had I thought more about it? Had I looked into condos in the area? Had I spoken to a financial advisor? There was a place in Burlington she'd seen online, very nice, very manageable. Then, one evening in March, she called me herself. We need an answer, she said. We've been very patient. Patient, as if I were a child being slow with my homework. I told her the house was mine. I told her I wasn't ready to sell. There was a pause. Then she said, and I'm going to remember this exact sentence for the rest of my life. You're 66 years old, and you're alone in a 4-bedroom house. At some point, you have to accept that it's not really yours anymore. It belongs to the future. I didn't say anything. I think I thanked her for calling. I hung up. I sat in the armchair in the living room. Irene's armchair, the one she used to read in, the fabric a bit worn on the right armrest, and I stayed very still for a long time. It belongs to the future. What she meant was, it belongs to us. Something shifted in me that night. Not anger exactly. Anger burns too hot to be useful. This was something quieter. A decision, I think. The kind that doesn't announce itself, it just settles. I called a realtor the next morning. Not to sell, not yet, just to understand what I was working with. She came by Tuesday, walked through the house, made notes, gave me a number. The market in Oakville had been strong. The number was higher than I'd expected. Higher than what was in my daughter-in-law's folder, as it turned out. I thanked the realtor and told her I'd be in touch. Then I called a lawyer, a different lawyer than the one my son used. I knew them. They were friends. My lawyer was a woman I'd worked with on a contract dispute years ago, through the municipality, sharp and no-nonsense, and exactly who you want in your corner when you're thinking clearly about something that matters. I told her what was happening. I told her I was considering selling my house and that I wanted to make sure the proceeds were protected, structured in a way that was entirely mine to direct. I was very specific. She was very helpful. Over the next 6 weeks, I got my affairs in order. Quietly, I kept answering my son's calls. I kept showing up to Sunday dinners. 2 more of them, a bit strained, conversations careful. My daughter-in-law watched me at the table like she was waiting for something to happen. In April, I told the realtor we could list. It went fast. 3 weeks and 2 offers. I took the better one. Possession date in mid-May. I did not tell my son. I had a plan for the letter. I'd thought about it for a long time. What I wanted to say, what I didn't want to say, what was worth putting into words at all. I'm not a man who expresses himself easily in writing. I was a municipal infrastructure coordinator for 3 decades. I wrote project summaries and budget proposals, but I wanted to get it right. What I ended up with was not long. 1 page, maybe a little more. I told my son that I loved him. That was true, and I needed it to be the first thing. I told him that I had watched him struggle this past year, and that it had hurt me in the way that watching your children struggle always hurts you, regardless of how old they are, or how the struggle came about. I told him that I could not give him the money, not because I didn't care, but because I did not believe it would help. That the problem was not the amount of money. That $90,000 would not fix what actually needed to be fixed. I told him that the house was sold, that the proceeds were in a registered account, my name, managed by my lawyer, that I was going somewhere I'd always wanted to go. that I would call when I was settled. Then I wrote the part that cost me the most. I told him that his wife had said something to me in March that I had not been able to forget, that I didn't write it to be cruel, that I wrote it because I needed him to know what was said in his name, to me, in my own kitchen, and that if he did not know it had been said, then there was a conversation he needed to have. I didn't say anything else about her. I didn't need to. I sealed the letter and left it next to the coffee maker at 5:30 in the morning. They had a key. They would come eventually. They would find it. I drove to the long-term parking at Pearson and took the shuttle to the terminal and got on a plane to Lisbon. I'd chosen Portugal deliberately. A friend from work, retired 4 years before me, the kind of man who does things other people only talk about, had moved to Porto after his wife died and had been sending me photographs for 3 years. Tile buildings, trams, fish markets, light that looked like it was coming from somewhere specific and intentional. He was the only person I'd told about my plan, and only a week before I left. He'd said, "Good, come to Portugal." I didn't go to Porto. I went to Lisbon, which felt right for a first chapter somewhere new. I rented a furnished apartment in Alfama for 2 months while I figured out what permanent looked like. The apartment had a window seat that overlooked a small square where old men played cards in the afternoons. I watched them a lot that first week. I won't pretend the first 2 weeks were simple. There's a particular loneliness that comes from being somewhere new and beautiful when you're used to being somewhere familiar. You walk around and everything is interesting and none of it is yours yet. I video called my sister. She lives in Halifax. She knew the broad outlines, not all the details, and I'm not too proud to admit that one of those calls I was close to crying. She talked me through it. She's good at that. But somewhere around the 3rd week, something opened up. I started finding the bakeries. I started learning which streets had shade in the afternoon. I found a retired Canadian couple, from Calgary of all places, who'd been in Lisbon for 2 years and adopted me like I was a stray, took me to their favorite restaurant, introduced me to their friends, made the city feel like it had room for me in it. I started sleeping the way I hadn't slept in a long time. Deep, uninterrupted. I'd lie down and be gone and wake up 8 hours later with birds outside the window. My son emailed me 6 days after I left. I know because I counted. The email was long. Parts of it were angry. Parts of it were confused. Parts of it, and these were the parts I read most carefully, sounded like him. The boy who used to sit on the kitchen counter while I cooked and tell me about his day. The person underneath everything that had happened and everything that had been said. He asked where I was. He said the house was sold, and he'd spoken to the realtor he'd found her card, apparently in a drawer, and that he couldn't understand why I hadn't told him. He asked about the letter. He said he needed to understand. I waited 2 days to respond, not to punish him. I needed to know what I actually wanted to say. I told him I was in Portugal. I told him I was well. I told him that I had meant every word in the letter, especially the first part, especially that I loved him. I told him that the money was mine and it was safe, and my plans for it were my own to make, and that I hoped he could respect that. I told him the business situation was painful to watch, but that it was his to resolve, and that I believed he was capable of resolving it. I told him I would call him on Sunday. I called him on Sunday. It was hard. It was also necessary. We talked for over an hour. There were long silences. He asked about his mother, actually, about Irene, in a way he hadn't in years. I think he needed to talk about her. We talked about her. His wife did not apologize. I didn't expect her to. That's not something I'm holding on to anymore. I've been here 4 months now. I found a longer-term rental in Belém, a quieter neighborhood closer to the water, a little garden I'm allowed to use. I've been thinking about Irene's roses. There are roses here, different variety, different climate, but they grow well. A woman downstairs has a wall of them, red and deeply orange, and she showed me last week how she prunes them. I told her my wife used to have a garden. She nodded like that explained everything. I walk every morning, more than 4 kilometers now, sometimes 6 or 7, because the riverfront is flat and beautiful, and I lose track of time. I've been eating things I don't know the names of and enjoying them. I've been reading more than I have in 20 years. There's a bookshop around the corner, where the owner speaks 4 languages and recommends novels like she's prescribing medicine. Here, this one, you need this one. And she's been right every time. My son and I talk on the phone every 2 weeks. We're finding our way back to each other slowly, in the careful way that 2 people do when something is broken and they've both decided they want to repair it. He's handling the financial situation. It's painful and slow, but he's handling it. That's all I ever wanted for him. Not for me to fix it, but for him to find out he could fix it himself. My daughter-in-law and I are polite when we have to be. That's where we are. Maybe it changes. Maybe it doesn't. I can hold that uncertainty now in a way I couldn't a year ago. I talked to my sister last week, late on a Tuesday evening. She's been thinking about retiring next year, and she asked me, half joking, whether Portugal was as good as I kept making it sound. I told her to come and see for herself. She said she might. I'm sitting here thinking about that. About Irene, who never got to travel the way she wanted to, who always said, next year when things settled down. And then next year came and something else needed doing. And I'm aware, not for the first time, that I almost didn't do this. I almost stayed in the house. I almost let guilt and habit and the fear of being difficult make the decision for me. I'm 66 years old. I have a pension, a well-managed retirement fund, a furnished apartment in Belém with a garden, and a neighbor who is teaching me about roses. I have time, if I'm careful with it, and for once, I intend to be careful with it in the right direction. The coffee here is still €1.50. The pigeons are still fighting over pastry in the square. The light this morning, coming off the Tagus River, was the color of something I don't quite have a word for yet. I'm working on finding it. I've been thinking a lot lately about how things unfold. Not randomly, but in a way that makes sense when you look backward. Not fate exactly, more like consequence. The things we allow quietly tend to grow. The things we ignore tend to calcify. And at some point, what started as a request becomes an expectation, and what started as an expectation becomes a demand. And by then, the shape of the relationship has already changed, without anyone formally agreeing to it. That's what happened with my son and his wife. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I've had 4 months of mornings by the Tagus to work through the bitterness, but I can see it clearly now. Every time I deflected without saying a firm no, I gave that dynamic room to grow. Every Sunday dinner where I swallowed the discomfort and passed the potatoes and changed the subject, I was, in small ways, participating in something I should have named earlier. That's not entirely their fault. That's on me too. The hardest thing to admit is that I knew, not in a way I could have articulated at the time, but somewhere underneath the ordinary business of the week, I knew that the folder she brought to my kitchen table wasn't the beginning of the conversation. It was where the conversation had been heading for a long time. I just hadn't let myself see it. But I understand now, sitting in this apartment with the garden downstairs and the sound of the city going about its life outside the window, is that the people who truly care about you don't arrive with folders. They don't circle numbers on printed pages. They don't tell you that your home, the place where you raised your family, where you watched your wife get sick, where you learned to be alone, belongs to the future. Love doesn't show up with a prepared argument. And so the choice I made wasn't really about the house. The house was just the object the situation happened to involve. The real choice was about whether I was willing to keep shrinking to accommodate something that was never going to be satisfied regardless of how much I gave. Some things can't be negotiated with. They can only be stepped away from. I think about Irene a lot when I sit in this garden. She was braver than me in most ways. She said what she thought. She didn't let things drag on. She would have seen what was happening far sooner, and she would have handled it with considerably less internal deliberation. I took the long route, but I got here. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes something in this story is simple, and it has nothing to do with houses or money or Portugal. It's this. The life that is genuinely yours is not the one other people design for you out of their own convenience. The willingness to protect it, Quietly, without drama, without cruelty, but firmly, is not selfishness. It is the most responsible thing you can do for everyone involved, including the people who are angry at you for doing it. My son and I are finding our way back. That matters to me more than being right. But we are finding our way back on honest ground now, not on the polite pretense that everything was fine when it wasn't. That honesty costs something. It also made something possible that wasn't possible before. The roses downstairs are doing well this week. My neighbor says the next few months are the best time to watch them. I'm paying attention.